Welcome back to this Elite Sunday Talk Show here on the Arise News channel. With me today are Professor Bola Akintenwa, Professor of International Relations at the Achievers University, Owo, Ondo State, as well as Professor Anthony Kila, Professor of Strategy and Development and Institute Director at the Commonwealth Institute of Advanced and Professional Studies, CIAPS. The Nigerian Senate has approved President Bola Tinubu's 2023 2.1 trillion supplementary budget for the 2023 fiscal year. Senate President Godswill Akpabio hit the gavel, announcing the approval after putting the report to a voice vote by senators. This was sequel to the adoption and debate of the report of the Senate Committee on Appropriations during Thursday's plenary. Chairman of the Senate Committee on Appropriations, Adeola Olamilekun, had laid the committee's report, which was adopted and debated before Akpabio put it to voice vote, and senators across party lines voted in favor. Meanwhile, the whip of the Senate, Ali Ndume, said the National Assembly quickly passed the 2.17 trillion supplementary budget to allow the government to meet up with some urgent time-bound issues. A Nigerian leading economist, Dr. Ayo Teriba, now joins me to discuss the supplementary budget and other related issues. Good to have you on this day live, the Sunday Talk Show, Dr. Ayo Teriba. Dr. Ayo Teriba, by the way, is an original member of this panel, this day live panel. You have been award.
Yes, indeed.
But it's good to see you coming back home. Well, Dr. Teriba,
thank you very much, Dr. Abati.
Let me ask you, why the supplementary budget 2.1 trillion naira? Why is it justified or justifiable?
Right. Thank you very much for the invitation. The 2.1 trillion budget, I should remind us, is about 10% of the original budget that was appropriated for 2023. And you will recall that after the attempt to unify the exchange rate since June, the exchange rate of the Naira has weakened considerably. The budget was set at, I think, about 435 Naira to the dollar in the official market. And at the moment, we are talking close to 800, an average of 800 since July this year. Now, this positively affects the revenue, the dollar-related revenue that are converted into Naira, but it will negatively affect the expenditure. So if you consider the impact of the devaluation, most of the prices budgeted will have risen higher than the budgeted amount. Inflation is running at 25%. So a 10% markup on the budget that is described as the appropriation is more than reasonable, given that inflation is running at 25%. And you would also recall that in the aftermath of the unification and subsidy removal, the populace had groaned under, the adverse effects of increased prices, inflation 25%, and the president has compassionately pledged to bring relief, to provide relief to the vulnerable, the workers and the small and medium enterprises. He has rolled out a long list of palliatives. He has also, agreed to some, dated pay relief for workers. All of these palliatives rolled out by the president since he came into power are extra budgetary, and it makes sense to use the instrumentality of a supplementary budget to assimilate them into the budget. If you look at the budget, it's dominated by security and defense proposals, is followed by the palliatives, and then infrastructure, works, housing, etc. All of these are in keeping with the pledge of the president to make sure that the vulnerable will not suffer in silence.
Well, Dr. Teriba...
So those are the justifications.
Yes, on another program, Dr. Teriba, we had Senator Ali Undume, who said that, look, this supplementary budget that we are all talking about is just for 7 weeks, because the year is almost over. So what really is the priority all about? What are the realities? What are the expectations? How would this be of any effect in 2024? Because we are almost in 2024. I will come to the details subsequently. So
it has nothing to do with 2024. It has nothing to do with 2024. The 2024 Appropriation Act will soon, the debate on it will soon commence, and issues related to 2024 will be addressed. So this is more like clearing up the backlog left in 2023. Fresh pledges, that the president had felt obliged to make to the populace, to maintain peace, to persuade labor to call off the strikes that they are planned, and the relief given to several segments of Nigerians. And quite a number of the components in the Appropriation Act were actually projects of the outgone regime. For example, you referred to the interview with Senator Alain Dume. He informed us that the controversial presidential yacht had been delivered, and and the spokesman for the Navy said it had been delivered as far back as June. So which meant that this was something that the outgone regime did. They were trying to replace a previous yacht that the federal government had, MV Araria, that has become dysfunctional. So this is meant to fill gaps that had emerged in the implication of the 2023 Appropriation Act. It doesn't matter if it's a week left in 2023. It really doesn't matter, even if it happened in January or February 2024. As long as there are gaps, there are shortfalls in what the 2023 budget had intended to do, and the reality is that they had met on the ground. You can always do Appropriation Act, so it's justified. It's legitimate.
No. Let's talk about the allocations. Let's talk about the allocations. It matters to Nigerians.
Okay.
That the office of the First Lady is going to get over 1.5 billion naira just to buy vehicles. That the villa itself is going to get over 2-something billion dollars to buy vehicles and to do some renovations.
Did you say $billion?
Billion naira, whatever. What
Nigerians, I wanted to say, the Appropriation Act itself is only 2.1 billion
naira. Yeah. What Nigerians have had is that people are collecting billions to buy vehicles. When even the King of England was riding in a keke napep in Kenya. Okay, does it make sense also to tell Nigerians that Nigeria is going to buy a yacht, a presidential yacht? We were told by Ndume that it was delivered since June, and that this government has to pay 5 billion for a presidential yacht. Whose child is that person? He's going to be riding a yacht when the rest of us are struggling to buy petrol. So how do you defend the allocations?
Okay. We're talking of, just for the purpose of proper context, the supplementary budget, the value is 2.1 trillion naira. So you're asking questions about 5 billion naira out of 2.1 trillion, about 1.5 billion naira, and about, the total budget for the State House is probably the smallest component of that supplementary budget, is 28 billion. And my suspicion, since it's about renovation, of residents, the replacement of cars that had become dysfunctional, I would be thinking that this is probably something that the outgone regime had initiated preparatory to hand over. I don't think that it's in the place of any new president to come in and begin to, approve budget for innovation. The outgone president had used the place for 8 years and had moved out shortly before the handover and must have initiated these things. And the dates you overrun, for example, if you take the yacht, they say it had been delivered since June, but it's not paid for. So it was something that President Buhari regime executed. As a matter of fact, they had intended to parade it in May, but it didn't arrive in time for the parade. It arrived a few weeks later. And was it justified in replacing an asset, a water transport equipment that Nigeria used to have, on which I had listened to you in the morning show, listing how many visiting presidents had been hosted on that MVR area. So President Buhari, I thought, did well if he met some equipment that had then become dysfunctional. Are you saying he should not replace it? These are the questions. If offices or homes in the villa needed to be renovated, are you saying they should not renovate it? You're picking issues with 5 billion, with 1.5 billion, out of a 2.17 trillion budget. Let's regain our sense of proportion. So I think we are just sensationalizing things. We are not talking of arms of the defense, agencies who got more than 100 billion. They are not talking of, the infrastructure agencies who got, hundreds of billion. They are talking about 1.5 billion and 5 billion, which are merely footnotes, if you care, in the appropriation budget. I do think that yes, the populace, are entitled, to share the concerns that they had shared, because the way the news was presented was that they are seeking supplementary budget to go and buy a presidential yacht. Not known to us that the facts was this was a done deal, that they are just seeking appropriation act to regularize, gaps left by the previous administration. So, it's kind of the presidential spokesman to have issued a statement, but I think that it would have been more proper for him to get the naval spokesman to speak on the subject. This is a deed that had been done 6 months, how many months, June to the time that the presidential spokesman himself took charge. This was a deal that had been done even while the president was trying to settle in the office, even while the National Assembly had just been inaugurated trying to settle in the office. So I thought that we should be patient to get facts. And if this is an historical fact, we shouldn't be presenting it as if it's new intention in the face of all the hardship that Nigerians are enjoying. Is it proper for the president to now be buying a new yacht?
Well,
so Dr. Abati,
Dr. Teriba, the matter is perhaps more serious than you take it, because Nigerians are saying that at a time when the ordinary man finds it difficult to live with electricity, to generate electricity, travel with keke marwa, move around in peace, buy even fuel. That it will be scandalous for the leaders of Nigeria to be seen not to be making sacrifice. And they ask the question, who is the mother of that child, whether president or whoever, who will be riding a pleasure boat when the rest of us are working very hard to make sacrifice? But you have looked at it economistically, and Nigerians are saying, don't buy that boat. But the question is, well, are we faced with a fait accompli or not? But apart from the supplementary budget, there is also something they call the medium-term framework, MTEF, medium-term economic framework. Now, what do we need to hold government accountable for in 2024 with that MTEF?
Right, okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Abati. I just want to quickly respond to the remarks you made. I share, the sentiments of Nigerians that any new proposals at the moment, that, to be pursuing in luxury when Nigerians are feeling the pinch of painful reforms should be objected to by the populace, if these are current proposals. But I'm afraid the matter of the yacht, the decision was taken by the previous administration to replace an asset that the country used to have that has become dysfunctional. The deal has been done. So it's not that anybody is initiating the purchase of any luxury item. The people, you could have engaged on this have left the government. And the Navy has taken delivery. You may want to invite the spokesman of the Navy to give more details, on this. Now, the issue you brought is quite important about the medium-term expenditure framework. We should be grateful, to the economic team, in particular, the Ministry of Budget and Economic Planning, for bringing this, the much needed facts about how the 2023 budget has performed, to our knowledge. So if you look at the MTF, the two important components for me are the following. How has the budget fared thus far this year relative to the original intentions? The revenue expectations, how did it compare with the revenue realities as captured up till July? The spending aspirations, how does it compare with realities, particularly recurrent spending and the capital spending? In particular, the debt service component of the recurrent spending. How much have we paid relative to how much we had planned to pay? All of these facts are there, in that MTEF. So it's important that we engage on those facts to be able to gauge the realism of what is being proposed for next year. And the latter part of that MTEF gives you, first flashes of the direction that the government, projects that the economy will be headed. Okay, we've had revenue assumptions for this year that hasn't been met. In the light of the performance of budget attainment this year thus far, how reasonable are the revenue proposals for next year? How reasonable are the expenditure proposals for next year? Particularly capital expenditure, which is the component where the performance is least. So we need to be careful. A situation in which governments come out at the beginning of the year and make a lot of paper allocations for capital spending. And when the real performance comes, middle of the year, end of the year, you find out that when the revenue when the phased revenue shortfalls, the first components that they cut off are the capital items. So they have no choice but to pay interest on the debts that they are owed. They must pay salaries, they must pay overheads. So the main culprit is the capital spending. We won't have the time, to go into the details and the specifics, but I do think that we will be, doing Nigeria a lot of good, if we draw attention, to those two components. The reality that the new regime met has captured up to July, and the realism of the proposals that are now coming, about revenue, about spending, about debt cost. And if you could, schedule, a separate, today is about the supplementary budget. As a subsequent date, it should be, the connection
Teriba,
between the reality captured in current performance and the expectations in the budget.
Dr. Teriba, I'm excited to have you back on This Day Live. You went at war, an in-house man that went at war. And there will be many things that
will have been showing up in other activities of
yeah, but this is your primary base from Apapa to Awolowo Road. So I'm tempted to ask you so many questions. President Tinubu
anytime.
President Tinubu says borrowing is not a crime, and that people should stop saying Nigeria will borrow. He wants to borrow more. Should we keep borrowing?
I don't know any country in the world today that can say they can afford not to borrow. Okay? All countries, there shouldn't be any fear of contradiction to say that all countries spend more than their revenue at the moment. But what differentiates countries is the quality of their borrowing. There are some borrowing options are better than the other. And I think that, we will do well to debate the alternative paths to borrowing that we have. There are borrowing types that enslaves you. There are borrowing types that makes you to sacrifice your future for today. Particularly borrowing instruments that are like IOU, that are like promissory notes against income that has been declining. But there are also borrowing instruments that are not IOUs, that are loans raised against assets. It doesn't compromise any future income. It doesn't promise to pay any interest. If you look at middle-sized countries that are comparable to ours, you'll be looking at maybe Malaysia, you'll be looking at Saudi Arabia, you'll be looking at UAE. They borrow more heavily than us. But these are Sharia countries who are forbidden by Sharia to borrow against income. They are compelled by Sharia to borrow against assets. And therefore, the quality of the debt that they raised are rated as investment grade compared to, the junk instruments that we raise, just IOUs. So they are forbidden from issuing IOUs. They are bound to go and find an idle asset that the investor will put money in, and it's from that asset that the principal and the dividend will be recovered. Nigeria needs to move in that way. Nigeria has more assets than any of the countries that I have mentioned. Whether you are talking about corporate assets, you are talking of real estate, or you are talking about infrastructure. We prefer to do IOUs to invest in our companies, do IOUs to invest in infrastructure. And we begin to say interest payment is now higher than our revenue. We should stop doing IOUs. We should stop securitizing income. We should begin to securitize assets. let investors come and put money in assets the way some investors have put money in LNG, the way some investors have put money in the GSM telephony, and let them recover, sweat to recover their profit and their investment. Nigeria will gain fresh income in the process. Nigeria will gain growth in the process. Nigeria will gain employment in the process. And we will get liquidity when the investment arrives. So when the Coordinating Minister of the Economy said that we can't borrow, we need to look for equity, that's what he's saying. So the fiscal proposals for next year, we've learned now that there are going to be deficits, close to 10 trillion in deficits. Don't fund that deficit with debt. Fund it with equity investments. It is done. That's what India is doing, and that's what the countries that have earlier mentioned.
Just before
so
I let you go.
President is on point. Is on point. Yeah.
Okay, just before I let you go, Dr. Teriba.
Go on.
Your comment on the new CBN under Yemi Cardoso. Briefly, because I have Engineer Eze waiting to comment on other aspects of this subject.
Oh, well, luckily, for Mr. Cardoso, the situation in Met in which the Naira was steadily losing value in the days before he took charge and a few days after he took charge has given way to a new reality in which over the past couple of weeks, the Naira has steadily been gaining value. Let's hope, that that trend continues, under his watch. Is the kind of expectations that you would have that as the new helmsman of the central bank settle in, not just Mr. Cardoso, but his 4 deputies, they had all arrived, that will see a stronger Naira. I think that the Supreme Court judgment contributed a lot because Naira started strengthening the day after the Supreme Court judgment, which lifted the cloud of uncertainty on the political terrain, brought closure to the election 8 months after the president had been declared. And I think the judgment, the fraud judgment in the interest of Nigeria that put $11 billion at risk would have played a role. But the fact that the CBN has started, clearing the backlog must also have played a role. And the open mouth policies that the central bank has made, scrapping the list of 43 items. So Naira is gaining strength in the aftermath of scrapping that list. It's positive. So let's hope that the central bank will say more and do more things that will strengthen the Naira. In a nutshell, that would be my response. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Teriba.